You feel it, don't you? That subtle shift in the air when someone makes a joke at your expense, or waits just 5 minutes too long to reply to your message. It isn't an accident. It's a probe. They are testing the perimeter of your soul to see how much of your territory they can seize without a fight. Most men live their lives as open fields, letting any passerby trample their grass and build on their land. They call it being nice or easygoing. Thomas Shelby calls it a death sentence. Today, you stop being a playground and start being a fortress. You will learn to identify the 7 invisible incursions used by the masses to diminish you. By the end of this journey, you will possess the calculated coldness of a man who understands that peace is only a byproduct of superior positioning. You will become untouchable. While the world watches Peaky Blinders for the suits and the smoke, we watch for the architecture of power. What Thomas Shelby executes in the mud of Birmingham, Niccolò Machiavelli codified in the courts of Italy. Power is not a mystery. It is a science. Today, we open the lab. Most will watch this and remain prey, content with their own vulnerability. If you are the predator, if you choose sovereignty over submission, prove it. Comment sovereignty and let the algorithm know who is in control. Like and subscribe to join the 1% who have stopped playing the game and started winning it. The first sign that your boundaries are under siege is the micro-trespass. These are the small, seemingly insignificant disrespects that the common man is trained to ignore. But in the world of high-stakes power, small leaks are what sink great ships. Never ignore a minor lack of respect, for it is the foundation upon which your eventual humiliation will be built. To understand how to handle this, we must look at the damp, tension-filled room where Thomas Shelby first encountered Billy Kimber. Kimber is a man of loud noise and cheap power, and he decides to test Tommy immediately. He doesn't pull a gun. He pulls a coin. He throws a single shilling onto the dirt floor and tells Tommy to pick it up. In that moment, the air in the room becomes heavy. A common man would feel the heat of embarrassment, perhaps laugh it off to ease the tension, or worse, he would bend his knees, reach into the dirt, and pick up the coin, thinking he is avoiding trouble. But Tommy Shelby knows that the moment his knees hit the floor, his sovereignty ends. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't look at the coin. He doesn't even acknowledge the insult directly. Instead, he looks Kimber in the eye and continues the business conversation as if the coin and Kimber's attempt at dominance simply does not exist in his reality. By refusing to react, Tommy renders Kimber's power move irrelevant. He creates a vacuum of authority that Kimber, despite his shouting and his henchmen, cannot fill. This is the psychology of the little thing. When someone interrupts you mid-sentence, when they arrive late to a meeting without an apology, or when they use a condescending nickname, they are throwing a coin into the dirt. They are measuring your submissiveness threshold. If you accept the micro-trespass, you are signaling to their subconscious that your territory is open for colonization. You are giving them permission to take something larger tomorrow. This brings us to the cold brilliance of Niccolò Machiavelli, who wrote in The Prince that men should be either treated generously or destroyed. He argued that men take revenge for slight injuries, but for heavy ones, they cannot. When you allow a small injury to pass, a micro-trespass, you are stuck in a strategic purgatory. You aren't destroying the disrespect, nor are you being generous from a position of strength. You are simply being weak. Machiavelli understood that the perception of your power is just as important as the power itself. If the public perceives that you can be prodded without consequence, the wolves will begin to circle. Tommy Shelby lives by this Machiavellian truth. He understands that every interaction is a diagnostic test. When Kimber threw that coin, it wasn't about the money. It was a psychological probe into Tommy's strategic irrelevance. Tommy's internal psychology in that scene is one of absolute frame control. He knows that his reaction is the only thing that gives Kimber's action weight. By withholding that reaction, he maintains his sovereignty. He understands that the man of power does not seek to avoid tension. He uses tension as a tool to define the boundaries of his kingdom. The common man fears the silence that follows a micro-trespass. He feels the need to fill it with a nervous laugh or a submissive, "It's okay." The strategist, however, breathes in that silence. He lets the tension sit in the room until the person who caused it feels the weight of their own mistake. In the modern Xadrez social, or social chess, you encounter these coins every day. Think of the colleague who accidentally leaves you off a vital email chain, or the friend who makes a backhanded compliment about your recent success. These are tests of your perimeter. The common man tries to play nice to maintain a false sense of harmony, failing to realize that harmony at the cost of respect is just a slow suicide of authority. If you want the respect of Thomas Shelby, you must apply his laws to your modern life. When you are in a meeting and someone interrupts you, do not stop talking. Do not raise your voice to compete. That is a sign of struggle. Simply maintain your pace and your volume. Continue your thought as if their interruption was nothing more than a passing breeze. Eventually, they will stop talking, and the room will realize that you are the one who controls the air. If someone is late to meet you, do not greet them with a smile and a "no worries." When they arrive, look at your watch, then look at them with a neutral, cold expression, and wait for them to provide the explanation. Do not offer them an out. Let the small injury remain an injury to them, not to you. You must understand that your time, your words, and your presence are the currency of your kingdom. When you allow someone to devalue that currency through micro-trespasses, you are declaring bankruptcy. By adopting the Shelby pause and the Machiavellian perspective on slight injuries, you transform from a target into a fortress. You teach the world that your boundaries are not suggestions. They are the laws of the land. This is how you begin to build your sovereignty, not through a loud declaration of war, but through the silent, calculated refusal to pick up the coin. The second sign that your perimeter is being compromised is the use of emotional bait. In the theater of power, your emotions are not yours to express. They are assets to be protected, or weapons to be deployed with surgical precision. When someone provokes you, they are not merely being difficult or angry. They are casting a hook into the water to see if you will bite. They want to see you lose control, because a man who is controlled by his anger is a man who can be easily led by those who remain calm. To witness the masterclass in emotional sovereignty, we must enter the dimly lit, suffocating atmosphere of the police interrogation room where Thomas Shelby sits across from Inspector Campbell. Campbell is a man obsessed with his own moral superiority, yet he is drowning in his own bitterness. He leans across the table, his face twisted with a mixture of disgust and envy, and he begins to launch a verbal assault on everything Tommy holds sacred. He mocks the Shelby family name, he insults the memory of Tommy's mother, and he speaks of the filth of the Birmingham streets with a visceral hatred designed to trigger a defensive explosion. He is waiting for Tommy to shout, to lung across the table, or to display a tremor of indignation. But Tommy Shelby does not give him the satisfaction of a single ripple on the surface of his psyche. He sits perfectly still, the smoke from his cigarette curling into the air like a silent ghost. His eyes are not filled with rage. They are filled with observation. He is not listening to the insults. He is analyzing the man delivering them. He realizes that Campbell's anger is a confession of his own powerlessness. By remaining an emotional void, Tommy forces Campbell to keep escalating until the inspector looks like a raving lunatic, while Tommy remains the only figure of authority in the room. This is the internal psychology of the blank stare. Tommy understands that a reaction is a surrender of information. When you get angry, you tell your opponent exactly where your soft spots are located. You show them which buttons to press to make you dance. Tommy's stillness is a form of strategic apathy, an armor that makes him immune to the psychological warfare of his enemies. He knows that in the hierarchy of the mind, the one who cares the least holds the most power. If Campbell cannot hurt him with words, then Campbell has no leverage. This aligns perfectly with the fox and the lion dynamics described by Niccolò Machiavelli. In The Prince, Machiavelli explains that a leader must be a fox to recognize the traps and a lion to frighten the wolves. A reactive man can never be a fox because his emotions cloud his vision, making him blind to the traps being set right in front of him. Campbell's provocation was a trap, a legal and psychological snare designed to make Tommy admit to a crime or commit an act of violence that would justify his arrest. By acting as the fox, Tommy recognizes the trap and simply refuses to step into it. He remains the lion through his silence, a silence that is more terrifying to Campbell than any shouted threat could ever be. Machiavelli knew that the masses are moved by their passions, but the great man must remain a master of his own internal state. To lose your temper is to admit that your opponent has more influence over your internal world than you do. It is a declaration of subservience. In the modern Zadrez social, you are surrounded by Inspector Campbells. They exist in the office as the gaslighting manager who criticizes your work in front of the team to see if you'll crumble. They exist in your personal life as the toxic partner who brings up your past failures during an argument to regain control. They even exist on the digital battlefield as the anonymous troll who seeks to bait you into a public meltdown. The common man reacts instantly. He types a furious response, he shouts back, he tries to explain himself, and in doing so, he loses. He has bitten the bait. To apply the Shelby law of emotional sovereignty, you must adopt the Shelby pause. When someone launches an emotional attack, do not speak. Do not change your facial expression. Take a slow, deliberate breath and count to 4. This is not for your benefit. It is for theirs. It signals to the aggressor that their words have failed to reach the core of your being. It makes them realize that they are shouting at a brick wall. In a professional setting, if someone tries to provoke you, respond with a neutral, data-driven question like, "That's an interesting perspective. How does it relate to the project goals?" This forces them to abandon their emotional theater and return to the realm of logic, where they have no weapons. In your personal life, if someone tries to bait you into an argument, use the power of strategic apathy. Respond with, "I see you're upset. We can discuss this when you're ready to be productive." You are not avoiding the conflict. You are dictating the terms of the engagement. You are the architect of the interaction. You are the one who decides when the conversation starts and when it ends. By refusing to bleed, you become a ghost in their machine, a man who cannot be manipulated because he cannot be moved. The third sign that someone is attempting to dismantle your authority is the malicious joke. This is the weapon of the coward, the passive-aggressive swipe disguised as humor. It is designed to wound you while giving the aggressor a get-out-of-jail-free card. The classic phrase, "I was just kidding." This is not humor. It is a test of your status. If you laugh, you are signaling that you accept the insult. If you get angry, you are labeled too sensitive. Ortin, it is a double-edged sword designed to bleed your respect dry in front of an audience. To see how a man of sovereignty handles this, we look to the volatile, theatrical world of Alfie Solomons. Alfie is a master of linguistic chaos. He uses metaphors, religious stories, and aggressive, biting humor to keep his opponents off balance. When Tommy enters Alfie's warehouse, Alfie immediately begins a performance. He makes jokes about Tommy's heritage. He mocks his business ambitions, and he uses a tone that borders on the hysterical. A common man would feel the need to join in the laughter to appear one of the boys, or to avoid the awkwardness of Alfie's intensity. But Tommy Shelby knows that Alfie isn't just being funny. He is checking the tension of the rope. He is seeing if Tommy will play the role of the submissive guest. Tommy's internal psychology in these moments is one of absolute literalism. He doesn't laugh, he doesn't smile. He treats every one of Alfie's jokes as a serious business statement. By refusing to acknowledge the humor, Tommy strips Alfie of his theatrical power. He forces the conversation back to the cold, hard reality of the deal. He makes it clear that while Alfie is playing a character, Tommy is running an empire. This is where we see the application of Machiavelli's most famous maxim. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. The man who is always laughing at everyone's jokes is a man who is loved, like a court jester. But he is never feared. People will joke at his expense because they know there is no price to pay. Machiavelli understood that a prince who allows himself to be the object of mockery will soon find his subjects questioning his right to rule. If you allow a malicious joke to pass, you are telling the world that your dignity is negotiable. Tommy Shelby understands that fear, or rather, a profound respect bordering on it, is built on the foundation of being taken seriously. By refusing to be the good sport, he maintains his status as a peer to Alfie, not a subordinate. He understands that in the architecture of power, humor is often used to mask a lack of courage. The person making the joke is too afraid to challenge you directly, so they use the shield of irony to test your boundaries. When you kill the joke, you expose their cowardice. You show them that you see the dagger behind the smile. In your modern life, the malicious joke appears in the form of negging from friends who feel threatened by your growth, or the boss who makes a comment about your expensive tastes or ambition and follows it with a wink. The common man laughs awkwardly, perhaps making a joke at his own expense to lighten the mood. This is a micro-surrender. It is a submission to the other person's frame. To master the social chess of boundaries, you must use the literal kill. When someone makes a passive-aggressive joke at your expense, do not laugh. Instead, look at them with a look of genuine, cold confusion and ask, "I don't get it. What was the joke?" This is a devastating maneuver. It forces the aggressor to explain the insult. When you force someone to explain a joke, the humor dies instantly. They are left standing there, forced to articulate their malice in plain English. They will usually stammer, say, "Oh, it was nothing," and retreat. You have not only defended your boundary, you have humiliated them without saying a single mean word. You have maintained your sovereignty by refusing to be a participant in their game. Another powerful Shelby tactic is the unblinking gaze. When the joke is told, simply maintain eye contact with the person until the laughter of others dies down into an uncomfortable silence. Do not say a word. Let the silence do the work. Eventually, the person will feel the need to fill that silence with an apology or a pivot to a serious topic. You have taught them in that moment that jokes are for children, and they are currently in the presence of a man. By adopting this cold, Machiavellian refusal to be amused by disrespect, You transform from a social pawn into a king. You define the room. You define the respect. You become the one who decides what is funny and what is a declaration of war. The fourth sign that someone is attempting to annex your territory is the overreach, or what I call resource encroachment. Your time, your attention, and your emotional energy are the primary assets of your kingdom. In the eyes of a strategist, any unauthorized entry into these domains is not a favor or a request. It is a raid. The common man sees his time as a commodity to be given away to anyone who asks nicely, fearing that saying no will make him appear cold or unhelpful. Thomas Shelby knows that being helpful is often just a polite term for being used. To understand the architecture of a total defense, we must look at the moment the Black Hand arrived from the New York Mafia in Season 4. Luca Changretta didn't send a message asking for a meeting. He sent a death warrant. The moment Tommy receives that card, he doesn't enter into a dialogue. He doesn't weigh his options or try to work things out while continuing his daily routine. He treats the encroachment as a total breach of his sovereignty. He immediately orders the shutdown of all his factories, calls every member of the family back to the hearth in Birmingham, and reorients his entire existence toward the defense of his borders. He understands that a threat to one part of his life is a threat to the whole. He doesn't apologize to his business partners for the delay, nor does he explain himself to the commoners who rely on his business. He simply executes a total lockdown. Tommy's internal psychology in this moment is a masterclass in strategic prioritization. He understands that if he allows the Italians to dictate the pace of the conflict, he has already lost. By pulling back and centralizing his power, he forces the enemy to play on his terrain. He views his resources, his men, his money, and his focus as a finite pool that must be protected at all costs. The common man allows people to pick his brain for free, to swing by without an appointment, or to demand his attention during his hours of deep work. Tommy Shelby views these as tactical incursions. If you allow someone to waste 10 minutes of your time today, they will feel entitled to an hour of it tomorrow. Tommy's response to the Black Hand is a message to his enemies and his allies alike. My territory is not for sale, and my borders are not porous. He treats his life with the same sanctity that a king treats his palace. There is no such thing as a small favor when that favor violates your hierarchy of needs. This is the manifestation of the Machiavellian principle that a prince who does not protect his borders will soon have no principality to rule. In The Prince, Machiavelli warns that a leader must always be prepared for war, even in times of peace. He argues that the most dangerous thing a ruler can do is to appear vulnerable or easy to reach. If the surrounding powers perceive that your borders are weak, they will inevitably invade. By maintaining a no-negotiation zone, you create a psychological barrier that deters encroachment. Machiavelli understood that human nature is inherently opportunistic. People will take as much as you allow them to take. Therefore, the only way to maintain respect is to make the cost of encroachment prohibitively high. Tommy Shelby doesn't just defend his resources. He punishes those who try to take them. He understands that in the Zadrez social, your no must be a wall of stone, not a fence of wood. In your modern life, resource encroachment is the most common form of boundary testing. It is the friend who always asks for a ride but never offers gas money, the boss who texts you on a Sunday evening expecting an immediate reply, or the family member who feels entitled to your financial success. The common man feels a moral obligation to comply, often accompanied by a weak apology when he finally has to say no. "I'm so sorry. I'd love to help, but I'm just so busy." This apology is a signal of weakness. It tells the other person that you would let them invade your territory if only you had the chance. To apply the Shelby law, you must eliminate the apology. No is a complete sentence. If someone asks for your time when you have already allocated it to your own growth, your response should be, "That doesn't work for me." You do not need to provide a reason. Providing a reason gives the other person a problem to solve so they can get what they want. If you say you're too busy, they will suggest a different time. If you say, "That doesn't work for me," you have established a sovereign boundary. You must treat your time as the ultimate currency. If you wouldn't let a stranger reach into your wallet and take $100, why would you let a colleague reach into your afternoon and take an hour? Protect your resources with the same cold, calculated intensity that Thomas Shelby used to protect the Shelby Company Limited. When you stop being available to everyone, you become valuable to the few who matter. The fifth sign that your authority is being challenged is the public test. This is the most dangerous form of boundary crossing because it involves an audience. When someone disrespects you or challenges your decision in front of others, they aren't just testing you. They are attempting to rewrite the social hierarchy of the entire group. If you fail to respond correctly, you don't just lose the respect of the challenger, you lose the respect of everyone watching. To see how a true sovereign handles a public breach of discipline, we must return to the high-tension environment of Tommy's wedding. Amidst the celebration, the Shelby brothers and their associates are beginning to lose their edge. They are drinking too much, shouting, and treating the waitstaff with a lack of professional discipline. Tommy sees the cracks forming in his organization. He doesn't pull his brothers aside for a private chat later. He doesn't try to keep the peace for the sake of the guests. He calls them all into the kitchen, the very heart of the operation, and delivers a command that has become legendary. No fighting. But it wasn't just the words, it was the delivery. He slammed his hand down, his voice cracking like a whip, and he physically shoved those who dared to talk back. He reestablished the hierarchy in a matter of seconds. He knew that if he allowed his own family to ignore his standards in public, his enemies would see him as a leader who has lost control of his own house. Tommy's internal psychology in this scene is rooted in the concept of frame dominance. He understands that in a group setting, there is only room for one primary frame. If he allows his brother's chaotic, drunken frame to prevail, his own strategic frame is destroyed. He doesn't care about being the fun groom or being liked by his siblings in that moment. He cares about the integrity of the Shelby name. He understands that a leader is constantly on stage. Every gesture, every word, and every silence is being analyzed by those beneath him to see if the crown is slipping. By correcting the disrespect publicly and immediately, he sends a message to everyone in the room. I am the architect of this world, and my rules do not pause for celebrations. He uses aggressive isolation. He pulls the challengers into a space where his authority is absolute, and forces them to look at the reality of their failure. Machiavelli provides the intellectual spine for this action. He wrote that the first opinion one forms of a prince is by looking at the men he has around him. If the men around the prince are capable and loyal, the prince is considered wise. But if they are undisciplined or disrespectful, the prince is judged poorly for allowing such behavior. Machiavelli understood that your inner circle is a reflection of your own standards. If you allow your friends or colleagues to make fun of you or challenge your authority in public, you are telling the world that you are a man of low standards. You are inviting further challenges from outside the circle. Public discipline is not about cruelty. It is about the preservation of order. A prince who is too kind to correct public disrespect will eventually find himself ruling over a den of rebels. Thomas Shelby's no-fighting rule was a Machiavellian necessity to maintain the image of the invincible leader. In the modern Zadrez social, Public challenges often happen in meetings, at dinner parties, or in group chats. It's the friend who brings up an embarrassing story to lower your status in front of a girl you like, or the coworker who questions your data in a tone that suggests you're incompetent. The common man tries to save face by being self-deprecating or by laughing it off, hoping the audience will see him as a good sport. In reality, the audience sees a man who is being dominated. To apply the Shelby law of public correction, you must use the unblinking isolation. If someone challenges you in a group, do not address the group. Turn your entire body toward the challenger. Give them your full, undivided, and cold attention. This isolation makes them feel the weight of their own words. Maintain eye contact without blinking until they feel the need to look away or qualify their statement. If their challenge was verbal, respond with a direct, piercing question that forces them to justify their disrespect. What was your goal in saying that just now? Or, do you have a point that is relevant to this conversation, or are you just seeking attention? This is not about starting a fight. It is about ending a test. By making the challenger uncomfortable in front of the audience, you reclaim the frame. You show the observers that you are not a man who can be prodded for sport. You demonstrate that you are the one who defines the boundaries of acceptable behavior. When you win the public test, you don't just defeat one challenger, you solidify your sovereignty over the entire room. The sixth mark that someone is attempting to infiltrate your sovereignty is the guilt trip, or moral manipulation. In the high-stakes chess match of power, morality is frequently weaponized as a leash for the weak. The common man is a slave to his own desperate need to be perceived as a good person, and manipulators sniff out this hunger like sharks sensing blood in the water. They use your ethics, your empathy, and your sense of duty as hooks to drag you into their territory. Thomas Shelby knows that morality, in the brutal reality of the world, is often a tool of control, not a compass of sanctity. To understand how to dismantle this weapon, we must look at Tommy's darkest and most complex confrontation: his war with Father Hughes. Hughes is not merely a man. He is the personification of corruption, hidden beneath the veil of divine virtue. He attempts to use the weight of God, the concept of sin, and the threat of eternal damnation to bend Tommy to his will. He looks at Tommy and sees a criminal, a man with hands stained by the mud of the trenches and the blood of the streets, and he believes he can use that immorality to shame him into obedience. However, Thomas Shelby is not a man who allows himself to be caged by labels he did not choose. His internal psychology in that scene is one of absolute icy realism. He does not deny his sins, but he refuses to let Hughes use them as leverage. Tommy sees through the cassock. He sees the monster that Hughes truly is. He understands that Hughes isn't speaking for a higher power, but for a lower one: the raw desire for dominance. By refusing to accept the gift of shame, Tommy strips Hughes of the only weapon the priest possessed. He doesn't engage in a theological debate. He treats the priest as a tactical obstacle that needs to be neutralized. He understands that to be sovereign, you must define your own internal code, rather than allowing others to judge you by the standards they themselves violate in the dark. This is the ultimate validation of Machiavellian thought. In The Prince, Machiavelli wrote that a man who wishes to make a profession of goodness in everything must necessarily come to grief among so many who are not good. He argued that a leader must learn how not to be good, and to use that knowledge, or refrain from using it, as the situation demands. When someone attempts to use morality against you, they are trying to force you into a state of goodness so they can profit from your passivity. Machiavelli understood that the appearance of virtue is useful for a prince, but being a slave to virtue is a death warrant. Thomas Shelby embodies this. He is not a man without a code, but his code is built on the foundations of loyalty, family protection, and strategic efficacy, not social approval. He knows that if he had tried to be the good man society demanded, the Shelby family would have been buried in a pauper's grave years ago. He accepts his nature, and in that acceptance, he becomes immune to moral manipulation. He knows that shame is a tool used by the small to try and pull down the great. If you do not accept the shame, it simply does not exist. It is a ghost that cannot touch a man of stone. In your modern social chess, moral manipulation appears constantly, though often in more subtle forms than a corrupt priest. It manifests as emotional gaslighting, where someone tells you, "If you were actually my friend, you'd do this for me." Or, "After everything I've done for you, is this how you treat me?" It appears in the workplace when a manager asks, "Aren't you a team player?" to force you into accepting unpaid labor. The common man feels the weight of the guilt. He feels the urge to prove his goodness, to prove he is a loyal friend or a dedicated employee, and he ends up surrendering his time and his dignity. To apply the Shelby law, you must adopt an amoral perspective on these requests. When someone tries to weaponize your identity against you, do not defend your identity. If someone says, "If you were a good friend, you'd lend me this money," your response must be surgical. "My quality as a friend is not the subject of this conversation. What we are discussing is that I do not mix my personal finances with my friendships." By doing this, you decouple the attack on your character from the request itself. You kill the manipulation at the root. You demonstrate that your emotional sovereignty is not for sale for the price of a nice guy label. You must view every request through the lens of utility and mutual respect, not through the lens of moral obligation imposed by those who seek to use you. Remember, those who scream the loudest about your lack of morality are usually the ones who would benefit most from you being an obedient victim. Be like Shelby. Accept who you are, define your own borders, and let the manipulators shout into the void while you continue to build your empire. Power is not a loud shout. It is a quiet, constant whisper of authority. It is the ability to occupy a space and dictate the rules of that space without ever having to raise your voice. Throughout this architectural breakdown, we have explored the anatomy of Thomas Shelby's dominance and the timeless strategy of Niccolò Machiavelli. We have seen that every social interaction is a diagnostic test of your perimeter, and the world is perpetually measuring your resistance. The common man lives in a state of reaction, allowing micro-trespasses, emotional baits, malicious jokes, and moral manipulations to dictate the rhythm of his life. He is a leaf in the wind, while the strategist is the storm itself. Thomas Shelby does not need to scream because his boundaries are forged in iron and set in concrete. He understood what Machiavelli knew 5 centuries ago. People will only respect the space you are willing to defend with your life. Sovereignty is not granted to you based on your merit or your kindness. It is seized through calculated coldness and the absolute refusal to be diminished by the masses. Your silence should carry more weight than the frantic words of everyone else in the room, and your no should be an impassable wall. Now, knowledge without execution is merely entertainment for the weak. Your final challenge is simple, yet it will be lethal to your old common man identity. In the next 24 hours, someone will test you. Someone will make a passive-aggressive comment, request a favor that raids your time, or attempt to provoke an emotional reaction from you. In that moment, you will not laugh to ease the tension. You will not apologize for having a boundary. You will not cave in just to be liked. You will apply the Shelby pause. You will look your interlocutor in the eye Maintain a neutral expression, and state your boundary with an icy directness. Observe how the world adjusts itself around you when you stop asking for permission to exist. Power is silent, but its results are deafening. Choose sovereignty. Choose to be the architect of your own fate. The era of submission is over. The era of your reign has begun.